Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this fourth and last webinar organized by the Department of Inter-Orthodox, Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. Thank you for joining us for this Greening the Parish initiative that will feature conversations between expert panelists on what it means to be a steward of creation through the lens of Orthodox Christian theology, best practices, and daily action. Before turning to Father John Christoforou, I would invite you to offer a prayer as we embark on what is one of the most crucial issues of our time, the protection of the natural environment and the Church's response to it. The text tonight of the prayer is taken from the Vespers for the preservation of creation. Let us pray. O Lord, who holds the circle of the earth and establishes its foundations, as the prophet says, accept our suppliant entreaties as our guardian and protector and savior. For we are your people and the sheep of your pasture, and by your infinite mercy, we shall be delivered from expected dangers. Do not then utterly destroy us, Master, but may your goodness conquer the multitude of our offenses, that we may glorify the ocean of your acts of pity. Amen.
So good evening, everyone. Let me begin once again, although this is our final webinar in this series, by conveying to everyone the wholehearted blessing of His All Holiness, with whom I communicated last week. And he was delighted that we are reaching out to our parishes. He is especially delighted that this initiative has come from young adults. And from the outset, he wished every success in this series of webinars and in the programs that will emerge from this work. In this particular webinar, we're listening to those who actually instigated this effort to green our parishes. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they're all young adults. Actually, the ones who pushed for this outreach are predominantly young women, which is why I contacted Jane Goodall, whose passion it is to involve young adults in the effort to protect creation. And she very graciously accepted to deliver a special message to you. A friend of mine recently reminded me that we did not inherit the environment from our ancestors. We're in fact borrowing it from our children. And that means that the present generation, my generation, has a unique responsibility and accountability to the next generation. My friend Bill McKibben expressed the same sentiment in a far more sobering way when he said, this generation may be the first to leave this world in worse condition than they found it. That's precisely why our ecumenical patriarch repeatedly states that the protection of God's creation is a moral challenge, a moral task. That's where the Church comes in. That's where all of you come in. And we're deeply grateful for your enthusiasm and very much look forward to supporting you in any way we can. Spiridula.
Thank you, Father John. And as Father John mentioned, and we're really honored and blessed to have a message from Dr. Jane Goodall. So we're going to watch a shorter version of her message, and the full version will be available on the resource page later on.
Hello, this is Jane Goodall, and I'm sending a message to all of you who want to help spread the Green Patriarch's message about caring for the environment. It's a very, very, very important message. This pandemic that has caused so much suffering all around the world, loss of life, loss of friends and loved ones, people on the front line showing so much courage as they risk and lose their lives helping to care for patients, people losing their jobs, economic chaos. It's affected the whole globe. And the tragedy is we brought this on ourselves by our absolute disrespect of the environment and animals. we destroy environments. Animals are crowded closer to humans very often, and we invade their habitats. We make roads and dams, and we get in closer contact with wild animals like that. We shall be confronted, and we need to get together, and that's why what you're doing is so important, because there is a far greater threat to the future of life on Earth, and that is climate change. And that too has affected the entire globe. You know, before this pandemic, I was traveling 300 days a year around the world, which is when I met the Green Patriarch. I'll never forget that. What a wonderful, wonderful human being. And, you know, I've seen ice melting. I've seen people who've had to leave their homes because the sea levels are rising. I've seen the terrible after effects of the more violent hurricanes and typhoons, of the fires, the floods, and the droughts. So climate change is affecting the world. And again, we brought it on ourselves by our disrespect of the environment. It's crazy, you know, to think we can have unlimited economic development in a world with finite natural resources and growing populations of people and their livestock. And already we're using up natural resources in some places faster than nature can repair them. My main message is there is hope. There is still a window of time when we can turn things around if we all get out there and do our bit. I'm very excited to hear that you're going out to faith communities and your local communities to try and spread this message. There's an urgency. We need to get together. We can make change. We need to have people saying, I can and I will make change. And then we will move towards a better world. We're all in this together. We all matter. We all make a difference. We're fighting discrimination, making a better world for everyone. So thank you, and I hope to meet you when I'm allowed to travel again. Bye.
We want to thank Dr. Jane Goodall for that amazing and hopeful message, especially as young people in this world and facing the realities that we see. And sometimes it can be very overwhelming. So we just want to thank Dr. Jane again for her time and for that wonderful message, because it really echoes the messages we've been hearing in our other webinars the past couple of nights, that together we can really make a difference, and it's really important in what we do. So I want to thank you all again for being with us this evening for our last webinar called Hopeful Aspirations with our wonderful young adults. Thank you to the young adults and our panelists this evening, and to our audience for being with us tonight. I'm very excited to begin this conversation, and before we do, just a reminder to the audience that you can put in your questions in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We will screen your questions and ask them at the end of our panel if we have time together. I would now like to introduce our panel. Ephemia Nicolakis is a first-year student at Quinnipiac University in their Accelerated Communications and Honors programs, and today we are very excited that she just received and was awarded her Girl Scout Gold Award. Nikki Pappas is the program specialist at the Burton 4-H Center, where she oversees animal husbandry and teaches outdoor education classes. John Touloupis is passionate about economics and new innovations that will build a better, greener future. And Alexios Touloupis, his brother, is a passionate filmmaker and storyteller, and together they started Green New World. Stephen Christoforou is the Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries at the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. And of course, a lot more can be said about each panelist and their achievements, and we're very excited to have each of you with us tonight. For the audience, you can read more about each person in the link that is posted in the chat. So let's begin our conversation this evening. Nikki, let's start with you. What drew you to the work you do today, and how do education animals fit into your teaching?
So great question, and thanks for having me. What got me started, I think I was really lucky as a kid. I grew up in this fantastic neighborhood that there's this, like, it's kind of overlooking the Charleston Harbor. I didn't live on the water, but I lived close enough to it where I could ride my bike down to this great old place called the Pitt Street Bridge. And my friends and I, we would check the tide charts in the newspaper. We would scale a wall and go down and look for shark teeth on this sandbar. And I think having the ability to go out and explore for myself really gave me, like, this is something that I really love to do and something I would love to share with people. And at that same bridge, the Pitt Street Bridge, I've seen so many different types of animals. I've seen, I've seen birds, all types of birds. I've seen manatees, I've seen dolphins, I've seen river otters. I've even seen a sea turtle, which kind of brings me to education animals behind me. I have a sea turtle back here. She's an education animal. You know, they're really great. They tell stories. So, for example, Belle is a straggler sea turtle. It was found on Tybee Island, and she wouldn't have made it out of her nest. And people can associate those stories with these animals, and they can remember them, and maybe they can share their stories and then grow up and be someone like me who gets to work with them and then tell other people about the animals and their conservation issues, but also like what we can do to help. I feel like Dr. Jane was saying, like, you know, there's so much hope out there. And I know we hear a lot of kind of awful things, but there is hope and we can change. And today I met a 4-year-old girl who could tell me everything about all of the animals in this tank I have. And it was so incredible to hear.
Thanks, Nikki. And I see that the sea turtle is slowly peeping up her head, but I really love the idea that animals also tell stories. So this idea in the education that what drew you was the experience, but also the experience that you're gaining and the stories you're learning from the animals. So Ephemia, I want to turn to you next because I want to hear a little bit about your story. That we mentioned your Girl Scout Gold Award was focused on greening the parish. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Definitely, I wanted to educate people about the environment and what is going on right now. I would not have known anything about this topic as a whole, global warming, the plastic issue that we have going on right now, unless I had taken marine biology my junior year of high school. And it was from that class, we learned a lot about the ocean, microplastics, and things that are affecting us that we can't even see, that are making such an impact on our daily lives, our day-to-day lives. And I wanted to learn more about this, and I wanted to educate everybody around me so that they could realize how much of an issue this actually is, because without me learning about it, I never would have known, and I never would have actually chosen this as my topic for my project. So I wanted people to have the same level of education and understanding as I did when I learned about the issues at hand.
That's awesome. And it seems like learning and through experience and really seeing how it affects us as individuals and taking it to be our own is really a common theme here. So John Alexios, I want to invite you next to speak about how your passion for issues of sustainability helped you guys start what you guys call Green New World. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having us on. I think it was summer after my sophomore year of college. I spent 2 months in Tijuana in Mexico doing Project Mexico, building homes down there. And we were doing 4-day home builds. And it was a really eye-opening experience going back and forth across the border. And, you know, we were tasked with just building really simple homes, but there was no water, no electricity. It was just, you know, a house with 4 walls, a roof, and a window that locked. And so when I came back, I started really questioning, okay, how are we going to solve this problem of poverty and at the same time also solve this problem of climate change? And I realized that I think what we think is there's one kind of point where it's meeting. Alexios, you want to talk about that?
You're talking about infrastructure?
Yeah, sustainability.
Sustainability and technology. That's like, we went to Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week and we saw some incredible companies with some incredible innovations, like an atmospheric water generator, something that pulled water from the sky. And we're like, why is this not talked about? Why are people not knowing about this? Why are we not implementing this? So we really got a passion to teach, and not even teach, but like let the people know what's out there, like bring awareness to the new sort of way of life that we sort of need to evolve to sustainability.
Yeah, awesome. And so obviously we can see the passion on this panel of everyone here. So Steve, I want to turn to you next because of your work in youth and young adult ministry. How can young people help make care for the environment a priority in their parishes, especially when there's challenges maybe from other leadership in the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that is a tension that I think young adults experience in the church a lot, sort of a division between the things that they are passionate about and the things that church leaders sometimes seem to be passionate about. And this can become kind of an opportunity for division. It can become an opportunity for disagreement. But really from like the perspective of a young adult who's passionate about this, it really becomes a question of organizational change, right? And I think if you're gonna try to navigate these questions of organizational change, it's really about finding common ground. And I think one of the simplest ways to think about it as young adults, right, is people in positions of church leadership want to engage young people. They want the church to grow, right? So those are kind of where our interests align. But I think leadership needs to realize that one of the things that young people need from the church is they need to be empowered with a faith that makes a difference. You know, if the church that we preach, if the gospel that we preach is nothing but words on a page, is nothing but kind of an abstract philosophy that doesn't change the way that we live our lives, that doesn't really permeate into our hearts and affect our values and the way that we interact with our neighbor, it's dry, right? I mean, there are a lot of young people who are more on fire when it comes to the values that they see in projects like sustainability, right, than sometimes the culture that they see in their parish. So I think it becomes a challenge for us. Like, this is what we need as young people. We need to see that the gospel actually makes a difference in the world. This needs to touch our hearts and our lived and real experiences. If we want the church to grow, if we want to engage young people, this is one of the circles that we just need to square. And this is where we can hopefully begin building a bridge and realize, like, the church wants growth. The church wants to engage us. Well, this is one of the things that we need. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I appreciate that because I think, like you're saying, the passion, so how we can make this intersection in the church too, right? It's in our theology, it's in the life of the church. It's just a matter of actually then allowing this passion to come through. So John and Alexios, I want to go back to you guys now and kind of talk about, you guys are really passionate about sustainability issues because of your travels. So can you tell us from your travels and interviews, what are some of the emerging technologies that excite you and give you hope for the future as well?
Sorry. All right, we're good.
So in our recent travels, we were in Greece and we were
the homeland.
Yes. And we had interviewed someone and we were talking to them, and he had this idea for algae that could become.
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's
amazing.
Like you got it.
Okay. So he had this idea to make algae, and like it's like a protein substitute. It was for power. He was running photosynthesis through it. And
carbon capture.
Man, yeah. And it would capture carbon, so you could set it up like next to a car factory, and you have all the plumes, and then it just sucks all the carbon out. And it was just, it was so positive.
That's one of the big things. So, because when you're talking about climate change, like a huge thing people talk about is emissions. So you have to cut emissions. So when people talk about it, one of the main ideas I always talk about is, okay, you don't get there without some form of carbon capture. And then on the flip side, totally rechanging
production.
Like cars. So real quick, like EVs are blowing up. That's really exciting. But then also energy grids and systems, like the way we make energy. Like, for example, it's geographic based. So when we were in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, it was a lot of solar, and because it's always sunny there, so then they're tapping into that. But in Greece, which was really cool, 6,000 little islands, and we went out on the sailboat with this wind energy company, and what they're doing now is they're laying hundreds of miles of undersea cable connecting all the little islands, and then what you have is the winds. Literally, they're taking up from like the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea coming down.
The famous Greek winds.
Yeah, the Greek winds there, and they're setting up these like, all right, you just have a little island, nobody's there. They just slap a wind farm down, power some undersea cables, and they start generating enough wind over time that they could sell that back to Europe. So then Greece, instead of being a net exporter of natural gas, they can be a net exporter of captured wind energy and sell it back to Europe. So it's just, those are two really cool things that we just saw and we're really excited about.
That's awesome. I didn't know about the wind, and it reminds me, I've seen articles about carbon diamonds where there's a machine that takes in the carbon, like you're saying, and makes diamonds. So I think that's awesome. And Ephemia, I want to turn to you next, because obviously there's some really cool technologies and things out there, and your project really focused on the local parish level, specifically your own parish. So I was wondering if you can share a little bit about what you learned in best practices on a more local level. Sometimes some of these technologies might seem really far, but what can we really do on our own parish level?
So what I actually had to do for my project was I had to find a national or global link in order to kind of tie it all together with my main community. And so I worked in partnership with St. Anna in Greek Orthodox Church in Roseville, California, who they're already implementing sustainable practices at a parish level. They have their own vineyard and they make their own communion for church every Sunday. And they have beehives and they get the honey and they sell it in their bookstore. So they also have palm trees and they use the palms for during Holy Week and Easter. So just these simple things that we don't even think of that we can implement in our own parishes at a community level that we can then use. That way we're not bringing things in from outside sources. We can grow them ourselves and actually help the environment as a result. And although that's California, obviously I'm from Connecticut. We can't grow palm trees here the way you can in California. There's other ways. You can compost. You can change what we're doing on a parish level in coffee hour at festivals and things like that. So I think that's really important to know. And that was something that I learned a lot about. I also learned that I did a pre-survey for my project as well. And I discovered that more than a quarter of parishioners who took the survey, they felt that both themselves and their parish couldn't switch to sustainable practices because there weren't enough resources. But there are in fact resources out there. So that was a big aspect of my project, was doing the research for people, because people just might not want to spend all the time looking for the resources that they might need. So I did all that research for anybody who needed it. And I gathered it onto a database. That way parishes can look at it and say, we just need to follow these steps and access these businesses and these resources, and we can be on our way to being more sustainable and more of a green parish.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know we definitely are going to link to your resources and page in our resource page too, because really that's what we're hoping to do through this webinar series. So next, Nikki, I want to turn to you too, because this local approach and really what you see on the ground is kind of also, I want you to tell us a little bit about the lessons you've learned from your work, which might be a little bit different than Greening the Parish, but has a lot of value, and what you think is important to share with Orthodox peers and parishes.
Absolutely. So I think one of the first things I've learned is you have to meet people where they're at. You can't just jump and say, you're going to change everything at once, because that can be really overwhelming. So you plant little nuggets of information, and hopefully like they'll take something, and then maybe whatever you plant, they're like, this really interests me. I'm going to do my own research and figure out how I can, change. And then I think that's especially important with the Greek Orthodox community, because not everyone is as willing to change as easily as, maybe me or you, to try new things. So slow approach and then meet them where they're at. I think also using teachable moments with people, like say at the coffee hour, it's like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we just used the reusable mugs? How easy that switch could be is such a great teachable moment. We use teachable moments all the time at where I work, because we're outside and there's so many distractions. Oh, other side. There's so many distractions. Like when we're in this classroom, for example, the sea turtle, if we don't have the curtains closed, everyone is like, oh my gosh, a sea turtle. And we're like, we know, we'll get there, but look up here. So use those teachable moments, but make it positive. So it's like, yes, you'll get to meet her later. Yes, coffee hour is great. And so are reusable mugs. Like, it's so easy like that. And then being really flexible, make a plan and then have a backup plan, have a backup to your backup plan. That's one of the things that we do here all the time. You try something out, it might not work, and then you have to try something else. Like, what's another way we can reach someone that might not be as willing to change, and just keep trying. And it's fun to go green, I think, and it's, for someone like me, I like personal challenges too. So I'm even challenging myself. We're saying like, let's go green, but I'm using my reusable water bottle, I'm using my reusable shopping bags. I think that's really important as well, to not only teach those things, but do it yourself and make sure it's something that other people can handle.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. I appreciate the simplicity and the positivity of what you shared too, because I think that's so important. It's the small, simple changes like our water bottles or the mugs at church that we're making still a slight difference, even if it doesn't seem like we are. And it's important to stay positive, like Dr. Jane was saying in the beginning too. Steve, I want to turn to you next because you do a lot of ministry work as well. And part of this conversation has to fit into the church ministry too. So I was wondering if you can tell us why and how any of this is relevant to our parish ministries and our spiritual lives as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's kind of two prongs here. There's like the ministry prong and the spiritual life prong. On the ministry side of things, it's something I alluded to earlier. It's something in our ministry training course that we put out, Effective Christian Ministry. Kind of like there's 5 basic needs that we've identified in the lives of young people. And the 4th one actually on the list is this need to be empowered with a faith that makes a difference in the world. Right? I'll give you a kind of a real world story that touches on this a little bit. We have a young adult podcast called We Are Orthodoxy, and we once interviewed a young man in the Bay Area, this guy Sean, who became aware of the income inequality that existed in the Bay Area. He wanted to be more interested in this. He wanted the community to take steps to help some of the disadvantaged kids in particular in the wider neighborhood. And the parish, in his experience, just wasn't terribly interested. And it's one of the things that led him to actually drift away from the church. And, that's a particularly striking example, right? Especially when it comes to those questions of like, economic philanthropy. St. James will tell us in epistle that like the real religion is care for widows and orphans. And so Sean, who had this heart for the gospel, who had this heart to actually like follow through on this call to love neighbor, saw that it was being lived out outside of the church better than it was being lived out inside of the church. And this is something that I think a lot of young people struggle with. Like there's this passion to do what is right, to actually follow the call that Jesus has for us. And we have that kind of like that disconnect between what we say and what we do. So I think from the ministry point of view, like this is what young people need. Young people have this passion to do what is right. We have to have avenues for that within the church. And then also from a spiritual point of view, I think this becomes a question of repentance for us as Orthodox Christians, because even though we are Orthodox Christians, I think there are some ways in which we have internalized, if I can say, non-Orthodox viewpoints about the world. I think especially when it comes to our understanding of creation, we're actually probably operating more with a kind of like a dualistic sort of thing where the world is disposable, the world is this sort of shell. We have this idea that your soul goes to heaven, but that matter doesn't really matter. But theologically speaking, like we are called to be priests of creation. We are called to lift all of creation into the eternity of God. Like this is not just a thing that we get to throw away. And I think as we come to terms with the fullness of our spiritual tradition and what the church actually teaches, we need to have a little bit of like a realization that sometimes we don't fully lean into that and live into that. And we have to realize that we're actually propagating other kind of religious ideals from the wider culture. Which are not good for our salvation and which actually compromise our ministry. So I think there are opportunities for honesty and self-reflection and repentance as the church continues to sort of get her feet under her.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I love the image of being priests, all being priests of creations. I think that's so important. And really, like I mentioned this in another webinar, but it reminds me of the icon of creation, right? Like Christ being surrounded by the cosmos and everything that he's creating, that we're really part of that too. Ephemia, I want to ask you next, because obviously you were involved in your parish and this was something that was really important to you and you were given the space to do this. So I want to ask you what your vision for Orthodox parishes to be more eco-friendly is.
So I would say that honestly, my vision is pretty simple because every parish is at a different point in their sustainability journey. So I just wish that parishes are more educated so they can take the steps that they need to take specific to their parishes towards becoming more eco-friendly. But I would also say that my true vision would be that we start at coffee hours, like Nikki had mentioned earlier, and become eco-friendlier there and stop the use of single-use styrofoam and plastic plates and cups. From that point, I would like to honestly see it expand to parish festivals where we use so many single-use items that are just simply used and discarded right after. So I'd like to see it expand there as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm reminded of, I have family in Germany, and we're told they bring baskets with little plates and their own utensils. So having a similar idea of, we can always have our church names on our mugs and plates and bring them to our church festivals, right? So food for thought for the future. But Nikki, I want to turn to you also and kind of asking you a similar question of what your vision is for our faithful and parishes to learn more about the environment and take action while staying close to animals and nature, because that's something that's really integral in what you do.
Sure. So I think the first thing is finding something that you and your family like to do in nature together. And then I think sometimes, not everyone is like, oh, like I don't like going for a walk isn't in nature, but like it can be. And you can make it a point. Maybe if you live in the city, let's take the time to go drive out and to the not city. Sorry, I'm not from a big city. So, and you go and you try and go like out in the country or go for a hike or walk. And then once you find that activity you like doing, I think finding out more about it and getting involved in different organizations. I love the idea of people working with like the Master Naturalist programs, because it's not only like you go through this curriculum to learn about natural history and you get to learn about wildlife as well, but then they want you to volunteer. So it's like to get your Master Naturalist points, you're learning and then you're volunteering so you can help others learn and hopefully become passionate about nature. And then the thing I think we were talking about, the Touloupis boys were saying how there's all this great technology out there, but you join these organizations, you learn about the technology and you share it with other people. I think information sharing is so important. And I've said this before in another meeting we've had on how, it's not easy to share information and sometimes people take information for granted. So you join your organization, you share it, maybe you bring back what you found to the parish and help get the parish little green group started. That's my little hope.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate the idea of also being involved in your local community is so important. It doesn't mean we necessarily have to have this right now in our parishes, but learning from those experiences in the community and how that then translates into life in the parish. So John and Alexios, I want to turn to you guys next and ask you a similar question of what is your vision for faithful and parishes to learn and adopt some of the solutions that you both have seen in your travels to become more sustainable?
I think the big thing is just being aware of where your parish is at, both like geographically and also financially, and just knowing like solutions like we've talked about that will work in California are not going to work in Connecticut. Our church is in a very urban downtown setting, and some people might be more in like the suburbs or more have more space. So I think it'll be like opening up communication and just taking a step back, thinking about it. These are things we have available. These are our resources.
Yeah. And in our travels, we've learned a lot of sustainability is built on AI and understanding what can get the most production where. So it'll take some time, but soon we will grow to the point where we'll be able to understand what we could implement where, and it'll have the best benefits. So you don't have a solar panel on a church in Minnesota and it's not as productive, where you could have like a wind farm connecting somewhere in Kansas.
I don't know.
It's geographic is the big thing, and understanding our location.
Yeah, and then just being open-minded as we move forward, and just knowing that the technology that we're going to see, it's starting now, but in the next 10, 15 years, and saying, how can we be stewards of creation and protect our church? And sorry, our dogs are freaking out. Somebody's coming home.
Thanks, guys. No worries. I like what you said, because I think it's an important piece, the education, again, that actually allows us to learn and do the things that are necessary, and also the importance of understanding our local communities and our local context, because even for sustainability, we need to know what that looks like in all different ways. So Steve, I want to turn to you again, because we talk about a lot of the young adults here are ready to engage or doing this in different ways. But maybe there's other parishes or places that people want to start doing this. So I want to ask you what you would suggest youth and adults do to engage their parishes and communities in this area.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's one word that I would use here, and the word that I would use is honesty. If this is something that kind of burns within our hearts, it's something that we should express, right? I mean, honesty is going to be at the core of any kind of well-functioning community. But I think when you think of who we are actually as the church, we're more than just a community. We are actually the household of God. We're a family. You know, early Christians called themselves brothers and sisters for a reason. And if we are brothers and sisters, then we should be able to speak to each other with honesty and say, like, this is a place where we can grow and we can develop. But I think that honesty needs to be twofold. That honesty also we, especially as the young adults who are maybe pushing this conversation, we need to be honest about the parameters of the conversation, right? Like, this is a conversation that should happen from within the tradition of the church rather than without. This is a conversation that comes from our love for Christ and our love for the created world that he has given us to be stewards over and to be priests over, because I think that sometimes opposition to environmental concerns comes from like a fundamentally non-Christian, dualistic, whatever kind of situation. But a lot of pro sort of environmental concerns also don't necessarily come out of like a Christian mindset, right? And I think if we're going to have this conversation, it has to kind of happen with honesty, and it's got to happen with Jesus at the center. Because again, like why do we care about the physical world? You think about icons maybe that you've seen of like Saint Seraphim of Sarath, like him and the bear, right? Because when we are actually filled with the grace of the Holy Spirit, we no longer interact with the created world in an exploitative sort of way or an adversarial sort of way, right? Like, we belong in creation. We are part of creation. And these oppositions and these exploitations kind of fade away. My favorite story, right, to think about how this actually expresses like a true Christian heart. There's this beautiful story of St. Silouan the Athonite one time who was walking along a path on Mount Athos, and there was a stray kind of blade of grass, let's say, that was leaning over the path. And the monk that was with him took out his walking stick and sort of thwacked it, and just kind of mindlessly, thoughtlessly thwacked at the grass. And St. Silouan was grieved. St. Silouan was grieved that this man needlessly struck out at this beautiful thing that God had put there. Right? Like, why it was this in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, whatever, he thwacked a piece of grass. But St. Silouan, he would write in his writings about how you know that your heart is full of the Holy Spirit because your heart becomes wide enough to embrace all of creation, right? And in that moment, right, this was St. Silouan on fire with the love of Christ who grieved for a blade of grass. And this doesn't happen because of like political cause. It doesn't happen because of that. If we're honest about who we are as Christians, we will love each other and be honest with each other. And yes, we will grieve even for a blade of grass.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I've never heard that story. And I think just that image and creation of our hearts being full to embrace God's creation in that way, like, I'm going to look at the grass a little differently next time I go outside now. But that's so true, because really there is beauty and light and everything that is created. So I want to thank you all. We have wrapped up our formal part of it, and we have a lot of questions that have come in from the audience, which I'm really excited about. So I'm going to pose one of the questions to the panelists. This one's a general question, so I invite each of you to just unmute yourselves and chime in. So our first question is, how can we encourage younger people to take leadership roles in the church, which could lead to development in this area?
I'll answer this first because I consider myself a younger person. I'm 18 years old. So definitely, how can we target more people like me in my demographic, my age? And I would say simply look at this from all sides, because there's so many different aspects of this that need to be covered. Meaning, the way I found out and I became so passionate about this was through the education. So educating everybody, whether through Sunday school, whether through Goya, whether through webinars like these, education is so, so important for creating that basis, so that every youth can just have that basis of education about the issues at hand. And then second, I would say use the resources that we have, which in this day and age with younger people is social media, is getting it on what they're looking at 24/7 right in front of them. And so that they're constantly seeing it. I see people reposting things about the environment all the time. So the next thing would be they actually need to take steps to help save the environment instead of just posting about it. So educate, and then through social media, and also making sure that they can take next steps from there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ephemia. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought about the way we approach leadership sometimes in the church, right? I think sometimes because, we do have this deposit of faith, we do have this understanding of right and wrong. I think that can sometimes lead to kind of a fear when it comes to church leadership. And sometimes I think people in a position of authority in the church can see their primary responsibility as saying no, as kind of like, making sure that the bad things are not happening. But I think that also kind of doesn't really fully respect the true Christian mindset. I think just good, effective leadership and good Christian leadership is always about saying yes. It's always about ways to say yes, not in a way of enabling irresponsible behavior or anything, but sort of guiding and flowing and allowing good ideas and good innovations to sort of like nurture. So I think it's a question for us in terms of like what the organizational culture of the church is, because again, in my experience, in the experience of a lot of other young adults, they tend to face a lot of no's when they sort of peek their heads up when it comes to ideas, as opposed to, yes, how can I help you actually do this and do it right? Right? Because it's different for the church to sort of guide from this positive sort of posture than the church for this to sort of clamp down in this negative posture. And I think as a church, we have to like ask ourselves, like, why is it that young people feel more comfortable taking innovative risks academically or entrepreneurially or whatever it is, right? Like these are places of freedom where leaders know that if we're going to get the best talent out of people, we're going to enable rather than squash. But I think we struggle with that sometimes in the church. So for those of us in a position of authority, how can we be leaders who lead with yes, as opposed to leaders who lead with no?
I can follow that if y'all want. I was also thinking, and this is just an idea, so take it with a grain of salt, everyone. It would be lovely to see, I think, young leaders and more involved with like the bigger organizations like Philiptokos or Parish Council. We have our little Goya groups, but yeah, I think giving them opportunities that are nurturing, like Steve was saying, and getting them more involved with those big decisions, even though they are like people are younger, but I think it's still important. And then maybe getting them involved with those leadership organizations at a young age would help them grow into bigger leaders. I know I work for 4-H, and part of the organization is getting young adults speaking, and they all have to do these big projects and presenting in front of their communities. And I think that's really important, and getting them involved in something like that. I don't know how it would get started, but I think it would be a great idea to get youth involved.
Thank you all. Yeah, I think those are fantastic ideas, and a lot more that we can definitely discuss. And I think there's room to grow in that way too. I totally agree. I want to go to our next question. This one is, how can young adults be nonpartisan advocates for the environment?
I think for me, the environment it's not a partisan thing. It's like, we need to protect it or else it's not going to be here. If we cut down all of these trees and get rid of all of the good quality water, there won't be plankton or trees producing oxygen, which is very important for the human population. So it's not a partisan issue. And I think if we address that, it's so hard because, it's been a nonpartisan, a partisan problem for a hot minute, and it shouldn't be. So having that proper education from a young age to get people caught up to speed, that it should be an all parties thing.
Yeah, Steve.
I want to flag this actually sort of as a big picture question. This kind of question actually is something that the Orthodox Church is going to desperately need to wrestle with. Because I think for we've been here for about a century, a little longer, give or take. One of the challenges that we've historically faced as Orthodox Christians is that the church has actually been sort of a vehicle for culture. Orthodox Christianity has been a vehicle for Greekness, or a vehicle for Russianness, or a vehicle for whatever. It's been a vehicle for kind of particular sort of ethnic cultural assumptions. And one of the challenges that I think we're already sort of facing, especially on the internet, is the temptation to simply swap one kind of culture for another. The temptation to, like, you especially see this with like the toxic sort of conversations that happen in the name of orthodoxy online, where orthodoxy just becomes this like thin candy shell over something that is actually reflective more of like 4chan or 8chan culture than the actual mind of Christ. So this is, I think, like, again, part of our repentance as Orthodox Christians. Like, for a long time, we haven't really known, I think, how to have like nonpartisan conversations, because so often the church has actually been this vehicle for culture. And like, it was easier, right, if these cultures were historically informed by Christianity in the past, right? But like, having this conversation now as Americans, I think, is just like, this is, I think what Orthodoxy is going to be struggling with in the 21st century, and already kind of is. And these conversations around the environment can actually hopefully be like leading edge test cases to help us like model what it is like to engage with things in a nonpartisan, sort of non-cultural way, to realize, as Nikki was saying, like, we're doing this in the light of the gospel. We're not doing this because of left, right, or up, down, or whatever it might be, right? As long as we remember to keep Christ at the beginning and not old country culture, or new country culture, or whatever it is, we'll be fine. But that's hard, and we haven't always been the best at that.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah,
We'll pop in as two aspiring internet stars. So one thing we always talk about before we make an episode,
being as apolitical as possible,
is tone.
Yeah,
it's tone, because people don't like being preached to. Because even like, you'll hear the best priests say they don't want to get like preaching people, and like, we're in the South, so that can go really like hardcore sometimes. Is trying to think about tone and what. Zeus, it's okay, dude. And what we always want to do for us when we're talking about like technology or something is just show like how cool it is.
Yeah, try and get people involved. Like, there's some do it very successfully by screaming and yelling, Greta Thunberg. But most people, if you're trying to reach a diverse audience, aren't going to like that. So what we've tried to do is just be as factual and very little opinion, so there's not too much to debate on. And it's honestly, it's not really something that we the people can deal with that much, since it's so high in politics and corrupted that like that's not real.
Yeah. But
climate change is real. And it's
so just showing like, these are the facts, these are where things can be going, this is cool. Like, it's how you present the idea and the tone and the message, so that way it's entertaining and engaging, and then that way they're not coming at it with a left, right,
belittling type tone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I want to go to our next question too. The question is, have you done any outreach in the general community with your concerns and ideas? So going back to this idea of local community outreach. So feel free to just unmute yourselves and go ahead.
I'll go first, just because this is exactly kind of what my project entailed. Just for some background, because I know a lot of people might not know, a Girl Scout Gold Award is the highest award you can receive in Girl Scouts. So I had to put in over 100 hours to put together a big project, and the culmination of my project was Eco-Orthodox, which is where orthodoxy meets sustainability, as I called it. And I put the link to my project in the chat box as well if you want to take a look. So I did outreach with my general community about my concerns and ideas. By creating this project, I created a whole resource guide that parishes can access and they can look through. And it basically lays out very, very simple steps that you can take as a parish, as an individual, even within your own home, your bedroom, your kitchen, your bathroom, even, on how you can take steps towards sustainability. And so my project just highlighted all of that, and it was specifically within my community, which was great.
Thanks, Ephemia. Nikki?
Sure. I think I've done, part of my job is outreach, and we'll go to local events, and we bring the animals, and it's fun because we can tell the animal story, and then people are very curious, and they're like, oh, we didn't know we had those types of turtles here. Oh, I didn't realize that the turtle crossing sign was for that turtle when I was driving out to the island. That makes so much sense. And just having those conversations and hearing what they know, meeting with them where they're at, and then seeing them be very concerned and excited to be a solution to some of the problems is very promising. And then also just seeing like kids handle a snake for the first time and not be afraid. And I think that's wonderful. And, you know, because a lot of people have those fears. And so overcoming a fear of something we don't know and we don't know a lot about, and education, I think, is just one of the big things we've all been.
Thanks, Nikki.
An idea that's cool that I've seen some places do. You know, some parishes will do like even like blessings, like holy water blessings for animals and pets, which I think is wonderful. And I remember like the first time I saw this, I was like, oh, like, where's this coming from? This is so weird, whatever it is. And then actually a couple months later, I took a trip to Mount Athos, which is something I used to do very frequently. And I was talking with the gardener at one of the monasteries, right? And he says actually very providentially, he's like, we have the relic of a particular saint, Saint Modestus, and we use his skull every year on his feast day. And we do like a holy water service and we give it to the cows and the goats and the whatever on the thing. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like that even that little thing sort of blew my mind, right? The fact that we can like actually pray and bless like the created world, right? And this is like, you know, outreach through prayer, right? Because we're actually sort of like, we're practicing what we preach, and we do this kind of very simple thing, which when I first saw it, honestly, here in the States, I was like, oh, that doesn't come from a good place. But then I had the reassurance of like the Athenites are doing it. Like it's totally cool and fine. But it was a lovely small thing.
Thanks, Steve. I want to go to the next question as well. Ephemia touched on this before, but social media is a huge part of our lives as young people. So the question was, how effective has social media been as an outreach tool for these ideas and concerns?
I'll start again. I definitely think that social media is a great place to start because it gives everybody a centralized place that they can visit and go to for their information, for their resources, for their ideas and steps they need to take. So I think that it's really effective if we can get it going, keep consistent with it, and really provide information that people can understand and implement themselves.
We know about that firsthand, being a social media startup. And in a way, we have a YouTube, we have an Instagram, and we're trying to, like, as best we can, put the news out there, talk to people. Like, we've done Zoom calls. We had a Zoom call with Atlas Motor Vehicles, which was really cool. We toured around Greece looking at sustainability. So, like, we're slowly uploading videos. So
it just keeps building like our resume, so that way whenever we're reaching out to people again, we have a body of work. And that's what's cool, is it allows us to have this body of work and share what's going on, and then slowly over time keep building that following and keep building that audience.
I'll tell you a thing about social media, especially about video, right? Which actually kind of connects to what the guys were saying earlier about like nonpartisan approaches and so forth. When I was in high school, I loved chemistry. I loved chemistry in sophomore year. And like the reason I loved chemistry was because my chemistry teacher loved chemistry. I think one of the inherently social things about human beings is that we don't merely connect like at a head level, we connect on a heart level for each other. And one person's enthusiasm for something will kind of ignite something in another person, which is a unique opportunity that you get through like social media and video, because you're not just communicating concepts and ideas, you're communicating kind of like a posture and a concern. And if we have like kind of a genuine, authentic love for these things, like this actually becomes a viable vehicle for expressing that, right? We're not just communicating postures or concepts, we're communicating like a posture of life, a way of life. And that comes through, you know, the tone of our voice. It comes through the enthusiasm that we have for something. And social media becomes this unique opportunity to actually like let other people catch, right, this love that we have in our hearts.
Yeah, thanks everyone. This might be our final question, but I would like to ask you all to give closing remarks after that, just on how you see things. So the question is, and this is more of what you all think, being adults too, given that long commutes and travel increase fossil fuel emissions, Is a truly sustainable society possible without living in close physical proximity to family, community, and employment, or does it require a social structural change that is a little bit larger than what we see? Yeah, Touloupis brothers.
So I guess going off traveling and stuff, in Dubai, we saw this entirely sustainable community they had built, where they took into account, okay, here's the sun, no windows, turn on cooling, all the roofs had solar panels, all the carports had charging stations, and then in Tilos, there's an island with 600 people, all their renewable energy, powered by the grid. Naxos, they had their own food supplies. So like it depends on like geography, location, and infrastructure. So I mean, it's entirely possible. I think now we've been programmed to think, I know like we're in Birmingham, or like if you're in a city, you know, okay, I'm 20-30 minutes away, I got to drive in, and I'm going to burn gas. But I think in 10-15 years,
like the positive thing is
EVs, the infrastructure,
and we're moving towards like EVs. Like Volkswagen is not going to make fossil fuel running cars in the future, so that's like a positive. And then you see what Tesla has done is a chain reaction where all the big guys are like, oh hey, okay, time to clean up our act. This is where it's going. This is where it's going.
Where things are going.
It takes time, and it takes good leadership.
Thanks, guys. Steve, did you want to comment?
Yeah, a quick, like looking at this from a different angle, possibly. Father Stephen Freeman gave a sermon a couple of years ago. I remember listening to, because you know his sermons are recorded. Where he calculated the number of miles driven and the number of gallons of gas burned for all of the people that were coming to church on any given Sunday. You know, and I think it's interesting, right? Because he raised the question, right? Like we have this kind of mindset where we want the bigger house, we want the sort of bigger yard, and it puts us away from the things that we kind of say that we value. But like, what if we lived closer walking distance to a parish, such that it wasn't incredibly difficult to get to a parish for like a nightly Vesper service or whatever it is, because it was a 5-minute walk as opposed to a 50-minute drive, right? Like the challenge that I think that he asked, and I think the challenge like kind of echoes outwards, is, are we approaching even these basic questions of like where we live as consumers, right? Or are we approaching them as Christians even? You know, do we want to live closer to like because that's an ancillary good, right? If we lived closer to our parishes, for instance, and didn't have to drive 2.5 hours each way, like even that, right? Like, are we approaching these basic life choices as consumers, or are we approaching these basic life choices as Christians? And again, I think like there's kind of second order and third order goods that sort of flow from this, right? If we reevaluate the way that we make choices with our dollars and how we kind of organize our lives.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thank you all, and thank you to the audience for the questions. As we wrap up here, as we're coming close to the time, I want to ask each of the panelists just to share very briefly what their hope is after this webinar series, because as Father John said, a lot of the young people on this call were part of the original reason that we started this webinar series. So I just want each of you to just briefly share what your hope is for your peers, for our parishes, and kind of this continuous moving forward after this webinar series, what it looks like to continue to be stewards of creation and put these practices into action. Ephemia, go ahead.
I'll go first. I think my hope is definitely just to see more parishes implement the plan that I have created and get more word out there too. I'm going to start reaching out to more people to get it more publicized. And so that would be my simple hope, is that more people kind of guide themselves towards sustainability.
Awesome.
My hope is that people aren't overwhelmed. And if you are feeling overwhelmed, you can reach out to any of us who would be glad and happy to help, and to work together and reach or use those resources that we can provide for you. And I hope we can make it a better place.
My hope is that we just like keep struggling to put Jesus first, and that we have the humility to learn, whether it's from older folk or younger folk, situations where we're not putting him first, and to sort of repent and to change our lives accordingly.
Our hope is that we have an open dialogue within our parish, but also amongst the parishes around us, so that we could collaborate and work together to create a better, greener future.
Awesome. Thank you all. And I just want to thank our panelists for being with us tonight. It's really been a pleasure to really end the evening with you all in our webinar series. We are now at 7 p.m. So thank you to our audience for being with us as well. To the audience, when you X out, there will be a brief survey. If you can fill it out, it will take literally 2 minutes of your time. And I also just posted in the chat, if you have any suggestions of how to continue these efforts and initiatives moving forward, you can write it in the survey or also email us at ecumenical@goarch.org. So again, I just want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the Ecumenical Office as a whole for really putting this together and hosting this. And thank you to all the other panelists that were on our 4 webinar series, since today is our final one. So this concludes our current Greening the Parish series. Stay tuned, because all of these videos that we've been recording and all the resources that have been mentioned throughout our time of all the webinars will be posted onto a Greening the Parish resource page that will be published on the Archdiocese website in the coming weeks. So definitely stay tuned for that. It'll be spread throughout online and press releases, but you will also receive it if you are part of the survey too. So we're really excited to release that and to continue our initiatives together as we work towards really being stewards of creation. So again, have a good evening. Thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward to our continued collaboration all together as we work as a community to green our parishes and really become greater stewards of creation. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.